Hey everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel, The Tutor named Fran. I'm Fran and this video is about... Make sure at the end of the video to like, comment, and subscribe. So let's get started. Solving by completing the square. So there's a few different ways to solve for quadratics. You have factoring, the quadratic formula. Now when we complete the square, we need to make sure that our leading coefficient, okay, so this is our leading term, 2x squared. The leading coefficient is 2 in this case. You need to make sure that the leading coefficient is always 1. Therefore, to actually solve this problem, we're going to have to factor out the 2 from the first two terms. Okay, so we're going to get x squared plus, and then you might be thinking, well, how do I factor a 2 out of a 3? That's really simple. You just do 3 over 2, x minus 1 equals 0. There's no sense in factoring it out of this one because we don't need that guy anyway. So you can see that if I were to multiply this in here, I would end up back where I started. Okay, so it's always really important that you end up with what you started. So make sure you factored that leading coefficient correctly. Now that we have a leading coefficient of 1 here for this term, we can actually start completing the square. So for completing the square, we need to identify our b term. And if you're not familiar with this method, you can watch my other video on how to complete the square. But basically where this comes from is the standard form of a quadratic. So your ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0 in this case. Here, b is the coefficient of the linear term of the quadratic. So in this case, the coefficient is this guy right here. So that's what b is equal to. So it's going to be 3 over 2. Then we're going to take 1/2 of b. Okay, so in this case, it's 1/2 times 3/2, which is 3 over 4. And then we're going to take 1/2 b and we're going to square it. Okay, and we're going to end up with 9 over 16. So we always add this last guy to both sides of the equation. So I'm going to have 2 times x squared plus 3/2 x plus 9 over 16 minus 1 equals 0. And then plus, so you might be tempted to just put 9 over 16. And usually this is what we would do. However, here we have this 2. So although we're adding 9 over 16 to the inside of this parentheses, to the left side of the equation, we're actually adding 2 times 9 over 16. So since we're adding that to the left-hand side, we need to make sure we're also adding that to the right-hand side. We're going to add this 1 over, since we don't need it here on the left-hand side. So now I have 2 times x squared plus 3 over 2x plus 9 over 16 equals 1 plus 18 over 16. Okay, I just simplified the 2 times 9 over 16. Now this might be a little bit easier to factor when it's more familiar terms, maybe integers. It's a little bit easier to know what that factors into. But from my previous video, if you saw that, you know that this will always factor into something that looks like x, there's a square, and then here you're either going to have plus or minus some term. And you saw that that term is always this guy right here. Whatever 1/2 b is, that's what always goes here. So in our case, it's a positive 3 over 4. Okay, and then everything else we copy down. So we had the 2, and then this equals 2, 1 over, I'm going to simplify. So here I can simplify by 2, and I get 9 over 8. Now I'm going to simplify the right-hand side. So here I'm going to write this as 8 over 8 plus 9 over 8, just so I can add those two together. So I end up with 2 times x plus 3 over 4 squared equals 17 over 8. And now I need to get rid of this 2, so I'm going to multiply both sides by 1/2. And this is going to cancel out, so I'm left with x plus 3 over 4 to the second power equals 17 over 16. Now I'm going to take the square root of both sides, so I'm going to end up with x plus 3 over 4 equals, plus or minus, don't forget, the square root of 17 over 16. Now remember your radical rules. You can break this radical into plus or minus square root of 17 over square root of 16. And we know what that is, right? That's plus or minus square root of 17 all over 4. And so we have x plus 3 over 4 equals plus or minus square root of 17 all over 4. Now we want to subtract this 3 over 4 for both sides. And we end up with x equals negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 17 all over 4 as our answer. Okay, and you can verify that you get the same thing with the quadratic formula. You can look on the graph. You can get the approximation by putting this into your calculator. Or you can leave it in this form here. Now this is a more advanced problem. It is a little bit more of a challenging problem because it has that leading coefficient of 2 that you have to factor out, and you have a bunch of fractions flying around. But you can always go back to the basics and just take it step by step so you don't get lost throughout the whole process. So if you enjoyed this video, go ahead and give it a big thumbs up, and remember, like, comment, and subscribe.